Everyone walked into the 2026 Critics' Choice Awards thinking they already knew how the night would go. Same names, same speeches, same predictable winners that slowly blend into the background of award season. But by the time the final trophies were handed out, it was clear this wasn't just another stop on the circuit. Something shifted, quietly, almost uncomfortably. And if you weren't paying close attention, you might have missed why this night mattered so much. Because the moment one battle after another was announced as Best Picture, the room reacted in a way that said everything. Not shock exactly, more like realization. This wasn't the obvious choice. It wasn't the safest option. And that's precisely why critics went all in. The film didn't play to comfort. It leaned into tension, complexity, and ideas that don't always land cleanly on first watch. And in an industry that's been accused of rewarding familiarity, this felt like a deliberate pivot. What made the win even more telling was how quickly it reframed the conversation around the film. Overnight, it stopped being one of the contenders and started being treated like a statement piece. The kind of movie critics rally behind, not because it checks boxes, but because it challenges the audience. And once that door opened, the rest of the night followed its lead. That momentum only grew when Paul Thomas Anderson took home Best Director. This wasn't a legacy nod or a polite acknowledgement of his career. It felt sharper than that. Critics weren't just honoring experience, they were backing vision, the kind that refuses to flatten itself for mass appeal. In an industry that's been accused of rewarding familiarity, this felt like a deliberate pivot. What made the win even more telling was how quickly it reframed the conversation around the film. Overnight, it stopped being one of the contenders and started being treated like a statement piece. The kind of movie critics rally behind not because it checks boxes, but because it challenges the audience. And once that door opened, the rest of the night followed its lead. That momentum only grew when Paul Thomas Anderson took home Best Director. This wasn't a legacy nod or a polite acknowledgement of his career. It felt sharper than that. Critics weren't just honoring experience, they were backing vision, the kind that refuses to flatten itself for mass appeal. In an industry that's been accused of rewarding familiarity, this felt like a deliberate pivot. By the time Timothée Chalamet was announced as Best Actor, it felt less like a victory and more like a transition. This wasn't about proving talent anymore. That debate ended years ago. This was about arrival. The performance itself carried a weight that audiences weren't used to seeing from him, and critics responded to that shift immediately. Less charm, more gravity, and suddenly the narrative around him changed. Not a rising star, not a fan favorite, but a serious awards force whose choices are starting to define a new phase of his career. And yet, even with all that attention, his win wasn't the one that truly caught people off guard. That moment belonged to Jessie Buckley. Her performance didn't dominate headlines leading into the night. It didn't rely on spectacle or emotional extremes. It was quiet, controlled, and devastating in a way that lingers. Critics didn't just reward the role, they rewarded restraint. And in doing so, they reminded everyone that subtlety still cuts deeper than noise. Almost instantly, her win reshaped predictions and forced a second look at performances many had overlooked. Then came the supporting categories, where momentum quietly changed hands. Jacob Elordi winning wasn't just about a single role, it was about credibility. Genre performances don't always get this kind of recognition, and when they do, it usually signals a broader shift. This wasn't critics chasing hype, it was critics acknowledging growth. And paired with Amy Madigan, whose win celebrated experience, risk, and nuance, the message became clear. This year wasn't about youth versus legacy, it was about commitment to the work. While film fans were still debating what all of this meant, television quietly took control of the room. The Pit and Adolescence didn't just win awards, they dominated attention. Limited series, in particular, continue to prove that they're no longer a side category. They're where the boldest storytelling is happening. Tighter narratives, higher risks, fewer compromises. Critics are responding to that shift, and this year made it impossible to ignore. Even the tone of the ceremony reflected that evolution. Chelsea Handler kept things sharp without flattening the room. The energy stayed loose, confident, and slightly unpredictable. Acceptance speeches felt less rehearsed, reactions felt real, and the entire night carried a sense that people weren't just checking a box, they were paying attention. And that's the part that matters most. The Critics' Choice Awards aren't just about trophies, they're about signals. They hint at where the industry might be headed next, which stories are gaining ground, and which voices are starting to shape the conversation. This year's signals pointed toward risk over comfort, nuance over spectacle, and storytelling that trusts its audience. So while the headlines will list winners and move on, the real impact of this night will show up later, in which films get greenlit, in which performances get taken seriously, and in which stories critics decide are worth fighting for. Because sometimes the most important awards nights aren't the loudest ones, they're the ones that quietly change the direction of the conversation. And this one did exactly that.